In the previous lecture, we discussed some of the predictable allophonic variations in English consonants and vowels. You may have noticed that when we discuss the patterns, we referred not to individual sounds, but often to groups of sounds that fall into a particular category. For example, alveolar plosives or tense vowels. It turns out that we as speakers of any language do not treat sounds as a big jumbled pile of individual phones, but we group them in our mind into categories, and many rules of phonological variation apply to such groups, not individual isolated sounds. Our objectives in this first part of the lecture will be to discuss how sounds are organized in our minds, to introduce the concept of a natural class, and to set a foundation for writing phonological rules based on the sound group features. Let's recap what we learned in the previous lecture. To be aspirated, a sound needs to be both plosive and voiceless. There are three sounds in this group: p, t, and k. Other sounds are not aspirated. To become devoiced, approximants need to be, approximants. There are four sounds in this category in English: l, r, w, and y. They also need to occur after a voiceless sound. There are a lot more voiceless sounds in English than just 3 or 4, so I won't list them here, but you're welcome to look at the IPA chart and note them there. So, it appears that as we acquire language, we simultaneously subconsciously group sounds by the features they share. There exist multiple groupings. We can group sounds by the manner of articulation, all plosives, all fricatives, all nasals, and so on. We can also group them by place of articulation, all labials, including bilabials and labiodentals, all dentals, all palatals, etc., etc., etc. Grouping sounds by voicing creates only two groups, voiced and voiceless, but these are quite large in their membership. Vowels can also be grouped by tongue height, close or high, mid, and open or low, and also tongue advancement, front, center, and back. Phonological processes apply to whole groups of sounds, not just individual sounds. We call these groups natural classes. A natural class is a group of sounds that contains all the sounds with a specific feature, and none of the sounds that don't have that feature. Let's look at some examples. P, b, m, w, and w are all bilabial sounds in English. There are no other bilabial sounds in English. Thus, this array constitutes a class of bilabials. The sounds b, d, and g are all voiced and all plosive. There are no other voiced plosives in English. There are other voiced sounds and other plosive sounds, but none share both features, so b, d, and g constitute the class of voiceless plosives. D, d, s, z, l, r, n, and the flap are all alveolar sounds, constituting the class of alveolars. E, and e are all front vowels. E, u, and u are members of the closed vowels or high vowels. A sound can belong to any class with other sounds that share at least one feature. For example, the sound E, as in heat, belongs to the class of high vowels, the class of front vowels, and the class of tense vowels. There is no definitive or finite list of natural classes. Humans mentally group and regroup sounds in different languages based on the features the sounds have, not a pre-specified list. This brings us to the distinctive feature theory. We cannot and will not go into its complexities. This is way beyond the scope of our very introductory class. But we will summarize its basics. The first premise is that our minds, groups sounds into categories by the features the sounds share. This is a subconscious process that can, nevertheless, be observed and analyzed by linguists, who can then describe it in precise terms. In phonology, the features are treated as binary and are marked with a plus or minus sign. For example, the phoneme t can be described as plus alveolar, plus plosive, minus voice, and the phoneme a as in apple can be described as plus open, minus back, plus syllabic. Notice the minus back feature as opposed to plus front. We could technically describe it as plus front, but it is not always entirely front for some people. Sometimes it is front retracted. The minus back feature allows for a more precise categorization that encompasses both plus front and plus retracted. Sometimes the smaller groups can also be organized into larger groups. For example, sounds like th and th are dental, and sounds like t and d are alveolar. But sometimes a phonological rule applies to both sets, dental and alveolar. Can you find a feature that all four sounds share? Yes, they're all produced with the tip of the tongue, which means that plus dental and plus alveolar sounds can be grouped into one larger category, plus coronal. Sounds that are produced with the body or back of the tongue are called dorsal. The dorsal and coronal categories are mutually exclusive. If something is plus coronal, then it is minus dorsal and vice versa. Another large category is obstruents. Obstruents are sounds produced with a significant obstruction to the airflow. Obstruents include plosives, fricatives, and affricates. The minus obstruent category is called sonorant. Sonorants include all vowels, nasals, and approximants. So you can see, even though nasals and approximants are consonants, technically speaking, they can sometimes behave like vowels and become the nucleus of a syllable, because they share the feature minus obstruent and plus syllabic with vowels. Phonological rules apply to natural classes, not to individual sounds per se. That is why, when writing a phonological rule, it is important to observe the key features circumscribing the relevant natural class subject to it. We are now ready to learn how to write a phonological rule.